Greetings, everyone. This is Russell Rucker, and I'm here for another constitutional talk. Today, I thought we'd get back to our convention, and I thought I'd give you a little feel for the language we were all speaking back then. You know, when we all were up there in Philadelphia trying to deal with the fact that we have no great constitution, that we're stuck in the past with the articles. Mr. Wilson next said, I do not mean to repeat what has fallen from others, but would an observation or two which I believe has not yet been suggested. First, every nation may be regarded in two relations, one to the citizens and the other to the French nations. It would therefore not be liable to anarchy and tyranny within, but has wars to avoid, the treaties to obtain from abroad. If it may let me add another observation, and that is the popular objection against appointing any public body for a long term is want of a body for life. And finally, becoming a hereditary one, there will always be three divisions holding their place for unequivocal terms and constantly acting under the influences of different views as impulse. Then the question being called for 9 years, going out triennially, and it passed. Then we are on the question for 6 years, with half going out biennially, and it passed. And then we considered to receive a fixed stipend for compensation for their services. General Pinckney said, I propose that no salary should be allowed. The senatorial branch is meant to be represented by the wealthy of the country, and as such should be composed of persons of wealth. And if no allowance is to be made, the wealthy alone would undertake the service. This, my friends, is one of the things that I talk about from time to time. These are the actual arguments. They're discussing the Senate and how the Senate should be paid and how long a term they would have. But I digress and continue. Dr. Franklin stated, I second that motion. I wish the convention to be fair with the people. And, there are a number of young men who would probably be of the Senate if lucrative appointments would be recommended. We might be chargeable in carving out places for ourselves. The question called then, and it died. Mr. Williamson then began. I moved to change the expression into these words, to wit, to receive compensation for the devotion of their time to public service. Mr. Ellsworth seconded, then moved. We strike out the words to be paid out of the national treasury and insert to be paid out of the respective states. If the Senate was meant to strengthen the government, it ought to have the confidence of the states. So here we have the argument that the state should pay and not the federal government. Mr. Madison said, I consider that a departure of the fundamental principle, which would subvert the end, intended by allowing a Senate a duration of 6 years, if this motion should pass, they should hold their place during pleasure, the pleasure of the state legislature, that is. Now, here we get to not only who's going to pay, but the original intent of the Senate, that the legislatures would be the appointee. Mr. Dayton speaking said, I consider the payment of the Senate by the states a fatal to their independence. I'm for paying them from the national treasury. On the question of payment of the Senate to be left to the states, it failed also. Colonel Mason then rose. I do not rise to make a motion, but rather to give a hint at an idea which seems proper under the circumstances. One of the purposes of the Senate is to secure the rights of property, to give them weight and firmness, but a term longer than 6 years would not avail it. Then the question went on to whether the words to be paid out of the public treasury should stand, and it did not. Mr. Butler then moved to strike out the ineligibility of the senators for state offices, with Mr. Williamson seconding. The additional dependence would be created in the senators on the states. The longer the time in service, the more complete will be the dependence. General Pinckney stated, I wish to make the states, as much as I could be conveniently done, a part of the national government. Not allowing them to serve locally would be restrictive for the ablest men from running the Senate in the first place. Mr. Williamson said, I move that a resolution so penned is to admit that the two following questions. One, whether the members of the Senate should be ineligible to and incapable of holding offices under the United States, and two, in the company of the particular states. We were on a question to postpone considering Mr. Williams's resolution, and it passed. Then Mr. Gary and second by Mr. Madison moved to add to the first question for 1 year thereafter. And on this amendment, then the question was asked, and it passed. This is all interesting arguments that we have directly from the records of the Constitutional Convention. They're debating over the Senate. And they're debating whether the Senate should be paid by the states or whether they should be paid by the federal government. And many wanted the federal government to pay it so that they weren't adhering to the state's demands. And as the passage I just read gets into whether or not a senator even gets paid at all, and the length of term. These arguments go on, and finally we settle the issue. The Senate is to be appointed by the state's legislatures. They're to be paid out of the federal treasury. And that purpose is simply so that they are loyal to the republic and not to the state in which they came. This really is a very important thing. And the length of terms, the triennial length of terms, where it goes out, they serve their 6 years, and every 2 years, a third of the Senate is up. It makes more of a cyclical election cycle. And the purpose of having elections so soon is so that the people serving us are always before us. So you're never too far away from an election. This is the whole idea of our republic. I thought I'd read a little right out of the records, and this is actually from my book, 126 Days in Phil, that goes through the actual language in first person as I just read to you. It's interesting to hear the arguments and hear the discussions and the debates. It really gives you a solid understanding of what our government is supposed to work like. I hope you get a feel for that today, and I hope you get a better understanding of exactly what it is that our founders were trying to gain. Our government is always changing. It's always moving to some extent, but it always goes back to those same arguments that were made in the convention. The Federalist Papers are simply explaining what it is that we're advocating for. And of course, the Anti-Federalist Papers gives us a broader definition too, as both sides are arguing back and forth. I hope this helps you today, and we'll catch you next time then on the next Constitutional Talk. Don't ever be too far away from liberty, my friends. We'll catch you later. Bye.